Next session, so if we can all have a seat, I'd appreciate it very much. Give you the clicker. All right, I'm very pleased to introduce this, I'm going to say young man, the prematurely gray hair. He's absolutely young, but he's a real pioneer in this space. He's been kind of a best kept secret for a long, long time. I'm really excited to have him on stage because he has an insight and knowledge of the space that a lot of people don't have, and I think he can prove to be an invaluable resource. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Nick and hand the mic over to Nick.
Thank you.
Nick, have at it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. First of all, I want to thank you all for giving me some time today. I know how precious your time is. I've been in the industry for about 15 years. So for those of you who don't know Phonex has developed a software platform designed specifically for pre-owned devices that is really meant to help you, whether you're a very large enterprise distributor or a small, two-man operation, to try to maximize the value of your used devices and also to maximize the velocity of how fast you sell. So I really mean it when I say I appreciate your time, because I know how valuable and precious that time is. If you're in this industry, you probably have something better to be doing right now. You could probably be going and selling some phones, closing deals, making money, and that's why I know your time is so precious. So what I've tried to do here is put together a talk that will hopefully benefit you regardless of where you sit in the supply chain. If you're small, if you're large, I want to talk about a topic that I think is going to be relevant to everybody. I first want to thank Bob, because Bob has done what I thought was impossible. He has assembled into a single room pretty much every single person around the world that might actually care about what I have to say here for the next 40 minutes. So I do really appreciate it. I'm just going to jump right in. But to be honest, and to be serious, this topic is very relevant to everyone. It's the future of our industry of pre-owned devices. And so I'm going to jump right into this. I have two goals in this presentation. The first goal is to make an argument that the future of this industry is essentially predictable based on core economic principles. And I want to give you the tools, give all the participants in this industry the tools, whether you're small, a two-man operation, selling phones out of your room or a 1,000 square foot facility, or if you're a very large enterprise. I want to give you the tools to stay relevant as we move towards what I believe is an inevitable future. So I'm going to make my argument by kind of outlining these four guiding economic principles. And my goal here is that if you can agree with these four principles, then hopefully I can convince you of what I have to say, because it's going to kind of string through my whole argument here. So number one, markets tend to move towards efficiency over time. I think this is a pretty easy one. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. Two is that value moves towards the consumer as competition increases. In our industry, the consumer is the person trading in their phone on one side, and it's the person buying a used phone on the other side. So over time, value is going to migrate towards those consumers. Three might require a little bit more explanation. The idea is that industries will vertically integrate until the transaction costs of doing so exceed the benefits. This one, I'll explain a little bit. I got interested in this topic, I've been for maybe 10 years ago. What I was trying to understand is, why do some industries remain fragmented while others, end up consolidating in a big way? And our industry, as you know, can be relatively fragmented on the demand side. Everyone says, oh, these small wholesalers are going to disappear, but they never seem to disappear, thankfully, if you're a wholesaler. I want to explain at least my theory on why that might be. So there's a guy named Ronald Coase. He won the Nobel Prize for economics. It's something called transaction cost economics. So the question he used to ask was, why is it that we even have employees? Why don't I just contract my labor all the time? And when I need something, I contract it, and the next week, if I need something else, I'll contract it again. His theory, which he won the Nobel Prize for, was called transaction cost economics. The reason is because if I have to go and hire a contractor every week, I got to renegotiate every week. The transaction costs become exorbitant, and it makes no sense. So what he essentially did was came up with this idea of the firm. What is a firm? A firm should take into its four walls anything where it makes more sense, where the transaction costs of doing something internally are less than the transaction costs of doing it externally. So go back to the employee example. If I have to negotiate, with Jamie's my VP of marketing every single week, hey, do you want to come work for me? It's going to cost a lot of money. But if I say, hey, we'll have an agreement. You'll work for me for 3 years. I can minimize those transaction costs. So similarly, we're going to see a lot of similar trends in our industry. Why do the carriers keep things internal and start and absorb those activities? And why do they, continue to leave some things external to the firm? And I believe that in the long run, all participants are going to have a reason to exist, or they're going to get squeezed out. And that's a scary one, but we have to address it. So these guiding principles have been at work in our industry for the last 15 years. So I'm going to go through one at a time. So markets moving towards efficiency. If you remember back when I got started in 2010, there was no trading program. It was online trading programs, highly fragmented. You had to go to a website and trade in your phone and hope they paid you what they said they were going to pay you. Over time, it became more systematic. The carriers came into the industry. It became much more seamless, but the value capture was still pretty low in the beginning, so you wouldn't get a big value for your device. And then finally, it's moved towards a much more seamless experience with heavily promoted programs where the customers are getting more value for the device and what the device is even worth. The second piece is how value moved towards the consumers as competition increases. So again, same concept. It kind of dovetails from the last one. In the beginning, the customers were getting very low values for their device. You'd have to go trade in your phone, ship it somewhere, hope they don't ding you because it wasn't the quality you wanted. Next, once the carriers got into it, it became very seamless, but at first you weren't getting a whole lot of money. And today, as I said, it's seamless, it's promoted, you're getting a huge amount of value for your device if you're a consumer, in many cases. The last one, the third one, industry is vertically integrating unless the costs exceed the benefits. So in the beginning, the carriers really didn't do any testing and grading. They used to just send out a spreadsheet and just liquidate it to a small number of people. We're talking about 10 years ago. At that point, it was the inventory is viewed more as something on their books that they had to just get rid of, right? Over time, they got a little bit smarter. They said, wait a second. Instead of just selling it to 10 guys, I'm going to start doing some coarse testing. I'll do a PGL test, powers up, good LCD, and I'll leave the finer grain testing to the value-added resellers who they ended up taking up that work. They would do the more granular testing. And then finally, as we move towards today, we're going to hear a lot about it. The carriers are moving towards robotics and they're performing finer grain testing, and that's going to cause some issues for the VARs who were doing that before. And that leads me to my last point. All participants must have a reason to exist. So if you don't have a reason to exist, you won't. Sad to say. But this has been playing out in our industry. So back in the beginning of this thing 10, 15 years ago, the large players did provide value. They provided liquidity. They'd come in and buy $5 million worth of phones and take it off the carrier's books. That was their reason to exist. Then over time, they've migrated their activities towards the finer grain testing. Let me do the testing that the carriers aren't doing, right? Let me then build out the customer base that the carriers are not building out. And now, fast forward to today, you're starting to see some of these bigger guys get squeezed out because the carriers are reaching deeper into the supply chain, and that is not going to stop. So before I get into the meat of my argument, I want to establish a picture of this industry so that we can all agree on what this looks like. So at a high level, we have the consumers trading in their phone, and we have the consumer on the other end who's getting a phone. In the middle, we have these consumer inflow channels. So you've got the carriers, the manufacturers, the big box retailers. They're typically either selling it themselves or they're going to be working with a enterprise, a large insurance company who's sitting in the room, many of the people who do all this, or they're going to be selling it down to the larger distributors. Beyond that, there's smaller and medium-sized distributors, and then there's the consumer outflow channels. So there are the retailers, brick-and-mortar stores. You could be online retailer. There are enterprises, so there are a lot of companies that will actually give phones to their employees. And then there are the small repair shops who are fixing the phones, and also the multi-carriers. And finally, it gets to the consumer at the other end. So I'm going to go one step at a time here. If you start at the top, the consumer trade-in, it comes in through these big box channels, carriers, manufacturers, retailers, and many times they're working with an insurance company or a big distributor to sell their devices, or they're selling it direct they have their own auction platform. And what I believe is most of the time they're reaching mostly the larger distributors. Of course, everyone's getting smarter, everyone's going deeper into it. But the enterprise distributors, the insurance companies, and the larger enterprises that specialize in distribution are really helping to go one step deeper. So let me jump into that. So the enterprise distributors are trying to skip over the large distributors. Of course, they're still selling to them because the large distributors do play an important role in providing liquidity. But they're basically trying to go one step deeper to these smaller and medium-sized distributors who I could characterize as brokers. And actually, the large distributors. Let me step back 1 second. I kind of break them into three groups. So you got the brokers who are literally flipping the devices. They're not really adding any value to the device. Not that they're not adding value in the supply chain, but they're not adding value to the device. You have value-added resellers who are doing what I said. There's a lot of things you could be doing. You could be retesting the phones. You could be flashing them, putting a company's software on it. You could be fixing them, whatever you're doing. Then there's the remanufacturers who are really much more sophisticated in repair. But either way, the goal is to get around those larger guys, go to these smaller guys who are typically the brokers and value-added guys. Now, I'm going to tackle each one of these kind of sort of channels one at a time. So the brokers, as I mentioned, they get the phone, they flip it down. They might flip it down to another broker who's flipping it again, or they might sell it to a smaller value-added guy who's fixing kind of some of the harder defects, and then selling it down to the consumer outflow channels. If you're a value-added reseller, you're probably still selling it down to other brokers who are just flipping your devices. You might be selling it to other VARs one step below, or you're really trying to go around these smaller guys and go right to the consumer. So in many cases, if you're a value-added reseller, you're selling directly to the consumer, or at least you're trying to get to the repair shops. Finally, the remanufacturers, it's a little bit different. This is sort of its own unique flow. They're typically bigger, kind of more sophisticated, buying the phones directly from the insurance companies and from the carriers. They're trying to rebuild these devices, and then they sell them back up to the insurance companies and to the carriers, or they're selling them down to a retail channel. So it's simplified, and I went fast, but I think it's important that we agree on this picture before I kind of jump into where I think things are really going. Here's the point, and people have talked about this from the beginning. People are getting squeezed. Value is getting squeezed from the center of the supply chain. So if you're a large or small or medium distributor, the value is flowing. And as I mentioned in the guiding principles section, it's predictably flowing towards the consumer. So the guy trading in his phone is getting more money, and the guy who is buying the phone is getting it for a better price. And the question is, what do you do if you're in the middle? You're getting squeezed. And if you're on the outside, let's say you're an enterprise, you want to squeeze faster. And the reason you want to squeeze faster is so that you can get that extra value to your partners or for yourself. So how has technology supported this value migration? Over the last 10, 15 years, technology has evolved quite a bit. So first of all, I'm going to start with the selling mechanisms. So the selling mechanisms have evolved. So 10, 15 years ago, we started with pure spreadsheet bidding. People would send out a spreadsheet, the carriers, and you would go bid on it if you're a large wholesaler. Over time, that's moved to what I call these large lot live auctions, where it's an improvement. Now you're buying on demand. Everyone's competing in real time, and it's all digitized, so you're capturing more data. The argument that I will make is that with those kind of large lot auctions and with spreadsheet bidding, there's a big advantage that's going to the larger distributors. So you're typically only reaching maybe one step down to the large distributors in the supply chain. However, as everyone's gotten smarter, the idea is let's go deeper. Let's go deeper and get more value out of the supply chain. So let's skip over these large distributors. And we've moved towards new selling mechanisms, which I call on-demand purchasing, and also small lot auctions. You can run auctions with lots of little small lots that can also have a similar effect. So I'll go through these one at a time. Spreadsheet bidding, the reason that this is typically favoring the larger buyers, you imagine you go through a spreadsheet, you have to buy the whole lot. And so you have to go through and decide which lots do I want to buy. If I win, I got to take the whole thing. Otherwise, I'm at risk of getting kicked off of this auction, right? So I basically need to pick and choose. If I'm a small customer, I have a limited budget. Which ones do I focus on? Which lots do I buy? You can't spray the field like you could if you're a large distributor. If you're a large distributor, awesome. I have a $5 million budget. I'm going to bid on everything in this list, and I'm going to, as much as I win, it's even better, right? And because you're competing mostly with the larger distributors, you're getting things at a lower price. So that's why I believe that spreadsheet bidding has really advantaged the larger buyers. Now, live auctions, again, it's an improvement. Now you're having a live auction with a bunch of lots. Again, I still feel that you're favoring the large buyers, and the reason is because the same thing, the budget constraints of the small buyers. Small buyers can't win every single lot. They have to buy just what they need. This can be mitigated by having 520 phone lots or 550 phone lots, but it makes for a pretty tedious experience for the buyers. Auctions can, and people get into this argument, what's better, auctions or stockless? I don't want to get into that argument. I think all of these selling mechanisms have a place, but at the end of the day, my feeling is that if you can build a mechanism that works for the customer, you're typically going to do better at the end of the day. In very high demand markets where there's limited supply, auctions can be a great thing. In other situations, they may not be. But the bottom line is you've got to find a way to get beyond the large distributor to a smaller distributor who can pay a higher price because they're closer to the end consumer. So that's why I've seen this on-demand purchasing have a lot bigger sort of a really good impact on getting higher selling prices. The reason is because if you're selling, and this is like an online stock list, if you're selling your inventory around the clock 24/7, buyers can pick and choose exactly the quantity they need when they need it. Everybody can see that your inventory is going down 24/7. You're selling continuously. The cash flow collection is very fast, and you're creating a lot of urgency. And what we've seen in this kind of scenario is, in the beginning, as expected, the gap between the large and small buyer price can be quite large. But over time, as competition increases, that gap shrinks. The large buyers either get squeezed out or they say, you know what, I either have to pay up on the price or I'm not going to be in this industry anymore. So they end up paying up on the price. But so we've seen a lot of success there. The warehouse is evolving. So I know a lot of participants are going to come and talk about this today. But similar to the selling technologies, we started with manual processes with spreadsheets. If you were going to just liquidate a few lots, it didn't really matter. Then we moved towards automation and testing and grading. So some of the software companies that come up to mind for automated testing are PhoneCheck, Manipov, Blanco. A lot of the carriers have their own, which I don't know what they're called, but they also are effective. And then now we're moving one step further towards robotics. So beyond just software to test and grade, we have Apcudo, FutureDial, Phoenix, again, homegrown technologies that I'm sure are just as competitive. But the bottom line is we're moving towards automation on both the selling side and on the warehouse side. What's going on with data as this is happening? Obviously, as technology is moving forward, data is proliferating. And I think there are going to be some topics about that later. So let's touch on those one at a time. With spreadsheet bidding, you're not capturing a lot of data. It's ad hoc collection. You probably just throw the data away after the spreadsheet. Maybe you put it into a database, but you might lose that data. With live auctions, again, it's a big improvement. Now you're capturing data online, but just think about it. If you have an auction once a week with 100 lots in it, you're collecting 100 data points each week. And moving on to on-demand purchasing, you can be collecting 10K plus data points every single day on demand. And I think that's why that's relevant. If you believe that we should participate as an industry in the global AI revolution, I think you have to get serious about your data. And I think Bob mentioned that. And on the warehouse, massive amounts of data are being collected, and that's going to lead towards improvements in the future. So here's the big question. How do you survive this squeeze if you are in the middle of the supply chain? And if you're on the ends, how do you squeeze faster? And how do you squeeze faster than your competitors? So I tried to put together this visual aid to help think about how we can do that. So I'm going to start with the enterprises, because everything starts with the enterprises. This is a supply-driven market where the enterprises are the ones who essentially control everything that happens later, the carriers and their partners. So this 2x2 matrix has transaction costs on the vertical axis, and it has potential value creation on the horizontal axis. So it's your classic 2x2. You want to do the high stuff, right? You want to do the stuff in the top right quadrant, which is not high. It's where the transaction cost is low and the value generation is very high. You don't want to do the lower left-hand stuff. So to illustrate, I'll give you an example of the lower left-hand. A couple things that I would consider to be on the lower left-hand quadrant. So you've seen this over the years, and I think we've seen enterprises try to do these types of things. Where the first example would be set up a proprietary storefront and sell directly to consumers. So I've seen this over the years. The large enterprises will set up a proprietary storefront, and for whatever, and they say, this is going to drive huge value because I'm going to go right to the consumer. I'm going to get the highest price for that device. And it may even be that red point should be all the way on the right-hand quadrant because the value could be so high if you can make that happen. The problem is the transaction costs are enormous, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Then the second option is, okay, let me just sell in the marketplaces. And if you're a marketplace, I'm sorry, but my view is if you're an enterprise, it's very difficult to make money selling on those marketplaces because, again, the transaction costs are super high, which I'm going to get into. It's not just the cost, the 10% they charge you. It's the cost of shipping out to individual people. It's the cost of getting returns, customer service. The transaction costs, keep going. So that's why I don't think those are things that will be pursued by the enterprises. The top left, I'm not even going to bother with the stuff because it's still low value. But again, on the bottom right, let's look at a couple things here. So what about heavily investing in marketing? So should the enterprises heavily invest in marketing? When I say enterprises, I mean the insurance companies, the carriers. Should they heavily invest in marketing and drive a ton of customers? My argument is maybe in the long run. Because, again, you could drive a lot of value, but the transaction costs are extremely high. There might be better uses of your time today. What about setting up physical operations in various global regions? Again, that could have a lot of value. If you go and you're selling in every single geography, you're going to cut out a bunch of people and you're going to make a bunch of money, but the transaction costs of doing that are exorbitant. What about giving out credit terms? We've seen a lot of enterprises do this, but they typically pull back. The reason they pull back is because, again, the transaction costs of doing so are extremely high. Monitoring the credit, underwriting the risk, and then that guy defaults. If you've lost a couple $1,000,000, the transaction costs are super high. That's why we see people pull back from that on the enterprise level of the supply chain. What about performing sophisticated refurbishing and repairs? Again, when you're doing 5 million phones a year, it's hard to go and do sophisticated repairs. Again, the reason is because of these massive transaction costs. If you're going to do a motherboard repair, you got to hire a highly skilled person, and you train him, and when that person leaves, he's gone. You got to start all over again. So that's why these are great things to do in the long run, but let's focus on the top right in the short term. So on the top right, the first one I'm going to talk about is automating testing and the precision of testing and grading. I do not believe there's any reason why someone should have to retest and regrade a phone. We have robotics, we have software. There's a lot of reasons why you can grade the phone to the specifications that the market needs and eliminate a ton of waste. I think that's a relatively low transaction cost. And one thing about transaction costs is they decrease as technology improves, right? So as technology gets better, transaction costs reduce. So as we get into robotics, as the software gets better, those costs reduce, and the carriers and the enterprises should be doing these things. Secondly, performing light refurbishing and repairs. Maybe you don't want to go and fix all the motherboard very difficult issues that someone else could do better than you, but maybe the 5-minute fixes, maybe the lighter kind of polishing, things like that you could do at scale in 5 minutes. If you're selling 5 million phones, you can't do everything. I think that the ones that I really want to focus on are the ones that really cost you nothing, right, and can drive a tremendous amount of value. So leveraging data for more effective pricing. Bob mentioned data. Data is absolutely critical. If you use the right selling mechanisms, you're going to collect a ton of it, and you can use that to extract more value from the devices. If you have a $300 device and you can get an extra 2%, that's $6. That's a lot of money in this industry. Increasing competition through selling technologies. So again, I think people are doing a good job of this now at the enterprise level. We're starting to use technology, whether it's PhoneX or one of a different software, to try and sort of maximize competition through the buyer base. And then finally, the last one is going to require a lot more explanation, but it's one that I'm very passionate about. It's the idea of using technology to tap into buyer networks. So to illustrate my point here, I'm going to pick one that was on the bottom left, and I'm going to pick this one on the top right, and I'm going to kind of illustrate why I believe one is sort of a tired, kind of old style of thinking, and why one is more on the cutting edge. So the first one I'm going to call lower left quadrant thinking. So I'm a carrier, I'm an enterprise. I'm going to set up a proprietary storefront and sell directly to consumers, and I'm going to disintermediate everybody. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to get the highest prices. I'm not going to have to deal with all these middlemen who really don't need to exist anyway. The thing that you forget about at that point is, wait a second, what about all of the transaction costs that all of these middlemen are actually taking on themselves? So for instance, what about the cost of marketing? If you're going to set up a physical storefront, you got to go and set it up in different geographies. There's tons of cost there. What about the cost of setting up your website, marketing? There's a massive cost there. What about shipping out one device at a time? And then, wait, what about on the way back? How about, the customers now want 24/7 customer service. They want to call you at midnight. They want to, return the device. They want to get an RMA. are you equipped to handle all those transaction costs? That's why this has typically not worked. It's the transaction costs that people are forgetting. So how do we move past this conventional and what I believe is an impractical mindset towards what I call upper right quadrant thinking? So what if you could reimagine your buyer base as an untapped distribution network? So again, each one of these guys, and I'm not saying everybody in the supply chain needs to exist, and that's actually core to my argument that they don't, but some of them do. The specialized ones do. The ones who have gone into a specific geography, figured out all the issues that you don't want to figure out. They've figured that thing out. Leverage those people as a untapped distribution network. Think about them as a node in a global supply chain, not as just somebody that you want to disintermediate. So what does that really mean? As I mentioned before, you're gonna, if what I believe is true, your testing and grading should get to a point where it doesn't need to be retested and regraded. You have robots. Why do we need to retest and regrade the phone? If that's true, the smaller distributor who is not adding value, they don't need to retest and regrade the phone, but they do need to hook into your source of inventory. So imagine if you could let your distributors connect into your inventory and essentially become an outsourced sales force for you. They've already figured out the markets and you have the supply. The best example that I can give you would be Airbnb. So think about Airbnb. Airbnb has a massive supply of people who want to get vacation rentals. They want to go all over the world and they want to rent homes. Does it make sense for Airbnb to go buy a home in every single geography in the world? And with all the transaction costs, every geography has different legal issues, every geography is different. I'm going to go buy a home in every single place. I'm going to capture all this value for myself. I don't have to share it with anybody else. Or, obviously, we know the answer. We know what makes sense for Airbnb. They are tapping into all the people with homes all over the world, and they are building a global network. And so that is where, if you're thinking about the upper right-hand quadrant, you should be moving, in my opinion. So to summarize, in the upper right quadrant thinking, to expand margins, enterprises do need to keep going deeper into the supply chain. They have to skip over people, but they can't be present in every single geography and in every market. In a complex global supply chain, specialized distributors do play an irreplaceable role. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. And enterprises can use technology to enable high-value distributors and tap into these latent demand networks. So, this is a topic I could talk about for hours. So if you want to talk more, please come to our booth and we can chat more about it. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward. So what's going to happen? If this model is adopted, a massive connected supply chain is going to create an explosion of data. And if you harness that data, you're getting data from all sorts of different geographies, demand data from every node in the global supply chain. You should be able to bring that data up into an intelligence layer that can then inform your pricing strategy, inform your negotiation strategy, and help you collect more, get more value out of your devices. So if you're lower in the supply chain, if you're a small distributor or a medium-sized distributor, what do you do now? So what you should be doing is the stuff that the carriers and the enterprises are not going to do right now because the transaction costs are too high. You should be heavily investing in marketing to go bring those buyers in. You should be doing sophisticated repairs and the repairs that they can't do. You should be giving out credit terms. You should be the financing arm for your customers. You should set up physical operations in different geographies. You should figure out all those transaction costs that they're not going to figure out. You got to stay one step ahead of them. So a couple potential reasons for you to exist. Number one, specialized sales reach. Build a customer base that the carriers and enterprises are not going to build in the short term. So you got to build a buyer network that has high transaction costs to reach. So some of these barriers could be currency barriers. Take currencies that no one else is going to take. Language barriers. Speak a language that the carriers don't speak. Do the financing. Figure out import hurdles that are very difficult to figure out. If there are regional idiosyncrasies, if a certain market just works a certain way that you know better than somebody else, get into that market. Regulatory hurdles, figure out the regulations in different markets better than anybody else can, and solve logistical problems that nobody else can solve. Now you'll secure your reason to exist. Or, get into high-value repairs. Perform the repairs that the suppliers are not going to do yet. That could be repairs, that could be polishing, that could be refurbishing. Do these things that are going to be hard to do at scale. The challenge with this, of course, is not only do you have to get that specialized labor now, you also need to be able to track it. You have to be able to track your parts. You have to be able to track your labor. You have to be able to track all of these costs, and that is not easy to do in this industry. The reason it's not easy, I'll try to illustrate with an example. Imagine a simple remanufacturing, a regular manufacturing process, and I've grossly simplified this. Let's say you're building a phone. You're going to receive some components. You're going to do a multi-step assembly process. You're going to test and QC that phone, and then you're going to send it to stock. Of course, there's a lot of complicated things that are happening in here, but at the end of the day, it's pretty much a linear process that you're following, right? Now, if you are a, so actually, I'm going to ask you guys a question. Does your business look like this? I think the answer is probably no. It looks nothing like this, right? Your business looks a lot more like this and probably more complicated. So here's an example, remanufacturing process. So a phone comes in, you're going to test and grade it. Let's say you test it, it's fully functional, it's got a great bezel, but the screen is scratched up. Hey, this sounds like a great candidate for repairs or sort of polishing. So I'm going to send it over to polishing. I'm going to get it polished. Now, oh good, I got the scratches out. Let me send it back to test and grade. Whoops, now the Face ID got broken. Okay, now I got to send it over to the repair guy. Okay, I'm going to do a simple repair. I'm going to fix the one component. We'll be good. Nope, sorry, you need a motherboard repair. This guy can't do it. You got to send it to the other guy. The other guy does the motherboard repair. He sends it back to testing and grading. Hallelujah, you passed the test, and now you send it to stock. This is your model. Now, remanufacturing is a complex decision tree process with high variability between companies. I'm willing to bet that if I come in there, you're going to say, nope, my business doesn't look like that. We do it this way. We do a little bit different. That's not going to work, right? Traditional warehouse management software does not work for this paradigm. This is something I'm very passionate about and something that PhoneX is hoping to solve. But at the end of the day, I do believe that it will all get figured out over time. So the specialized distributors will figure out how to fix the phones or to find a market that nobody else can penetrate. And I think we're going to stop talking about large and small distributors. I think large and small distributors are going to become specialized distributors. Are you specialized or are you not specialized? And those layers are going to get squeezed together. People will exit, but the specialized people will remain. If you're specialized, you can be specialized in one of two ways or both. Either you have a specialized customer base that nobody can reach, and then maybe you're just a broker flipping the devices, but that still is a valuable tool, a valuable role in the supply chain. Or you're a specialized repair person. And I believe that the value-added resellers who are just testing and grading, if they don't evolve beyond that and start doing more sophisticated repairs, they're going to get squeezed out. So I think that the value-added resellers and the remanufacturers are going to start looking more and more like each other. And you're either going to be specialized on selling or specialized on repairs. And if you can do one of those things, you can exist. So the end state, which flows from all of this, is the carriers, manufacturers are going to start encroaching even further into your business if you're a wholesaler. They're going to get testing and grading to a point where you don't have to retest and regrade. They're going to start doing some light testing and light fixes that they can do at scale. And then one step below, they're going to build out these very large distribution networks virtually with technology where if you're just a broker but you have some huge customer base that they don't have, you can essentially act, the carrier can act as the outsourced or back end for that broker who's then selling the phones all over the world. Or if you're a remanufacturer, you're going to bring in devices, you're going to do the repairs that nobody else can do, and you're going to sell it back. Or you're going to do both. If you can do both, that's even better. But ultimately, with this huge virtual distribution network, we're going to collect a ton of data. That data is going to flow up to the carriers and enterprises who are going to get ever smarter at capturing value from the devices. And they're going to optimize everything they do through data, as Bob has been talking about. So, takeaways. And sorry, that was a lot to go through in a short period of time. And I'm trying to make sure I don't go over. If you're an enterprise, you've got to keep going deeper into the supply chain, but you have to recognize when it makes more sense to leverage specialized players. You can't do everything yourself, but you must continue to adopt technologies that drive efficiency, and you've got to leverage data. Our industry should participate in the global AI revolution, and it will. If you are a distributor, you've got to stay one step ahead of the enterprises. And this is going to be a moving target, but this is what you've done your whole career. You have stayed ahead of them. You've adapted and you've made it work. And you found out what's the next thing I can do to stay one step ahead. And that is going to be a moving target, but you're going to figure it out. You've got to do things that are difficult to automate at scale. If you're thinking about doing something, just ask yourself, can a robot do it? Can this be easily done by software? If so, maybe look somewhere else. Specialize, specialize, specialize. Secure your reason to exist. I come from the startup technology world. There's a saying that says, if you're not selling something or making something, you probably don't need to be here, right? So I think if you reframe that for our industry, if you're not reselling something or remaking something, you probably don't have a reason to be here. But if you are, and you focus on these core principles, I think your future will be bright and you'll secure your reason to exist. Oh, and sorry, one last thing. If you want to get the presentation, I have a QR code there. You can scan it and you can take a look at your leisure. Please feel free to come and chat with us more if you're interested. Would love to get your feedback. Thank you. Is Bob gone?